Now, I've used complexity 3 times in the last 60 seconds. Let me explain. Because there are 2 kinds of complexity, one we're talking about, one we're not talking about. The kind of complexity we are not talking about is the complexity of detail. Engineers love detail complexity. They write computer programs to handle detail complexity. That's not the complexity we're talking about. The complexity that we are talking about is complexity that's created by the uncertainty in the future. Complexity that's created by the ambiguity in the future. It all has to do with the target completion time. For example, if our target completion time for a project is tomorrow afternoon, what is the likelihood we know which employees will be assigned to complete that project? What's the likelihood? What's the likelihood that the materials that will be used in that project we already have in our possession? What's the likelihood we have them already staged and ready to go? What's the likelihood we know what time tomorrow afternoon the customer will be by to pick that project up? Now, why is it likely that we will know all that stuff? Because the project is due tomorrow afternoon. We better know all of that stuff. If, however, the project is due 18 months into the future, perhaps we're building a construction project, 18-month time span on this project, what's the possibility that a person we have assigned to work on that project during the next 18 months might quit? Is that possible? Is it possible that the vendor that's going to supply our materials for that project might go out of business in the next 18 months? What's the possibility that there might be a disruption in the supply chain in the next 18 months? What's the possibility that the customer might call us and say, you know, this project's going along fine, but we'd like to make a change? Some of you like that because it's called a change order. You can bill more for it. If I am the project manager on that project, do any of those things matter? Somebody quits. Materials aren't delivered on time. Our vendor goes out of business. The customer makes a change. What happened to my target completion time? Nothing. But what happened to the uncertainty or the ambiguity inside that project? To manage that project requires a higher level of capability, and we can actually use the metric of time span to measure that complexity. Question: how did Elliot come up with this? Did he just pluck this time span stuff out of the clear blue? It turns out that time span comes from something that managers do every single day. That one thing that managers do every single day is that they set goals. So what's a goal? At its most fundamental understanding, a goal is made up of these 2 elements. It's a what by when. Most of the time when we're talking with our teams or team members about their goals, we focus on the what part. But guess what? It turns out it's the by when that gives us insight into the complexity of the task, gives us insight into the complexity of the goal. It is the by when, or the target completion time, that is the time span. Once you understand this elegant simplicity, you're now going to see this is going to touch everything a manager does. It's going to touch how we design and configure roles inside the organization. Because at some point in the organization, there's a turnover. We no longer configure work around the capabilities of a person. We now understand there are roles that have to be played, and we have to find people to effectively play those roles. Time span is going to help us understand managerial relationships, those vertical managerial relationships where we have an executive manager, a supervisor, and a team member. This is also going to impact our horizontal cross-functional working relationships because work goes horizontally through the organization. This is going to have a big impact on the way that we hire talent. Not only for hiring talent in terms of internal promotions, but also for external recruiting. This is also going to have an impact on who we terminate. Someone who is non-productive, and how do we tell? It's also going to impact our planning scenarios, our goal-setting scenarios. This is going to impact the way that we make decisions. We can actually measure the complexity of a decision using time span. This is going to impact the way that we solve problems based on the time span of the problem that we have to solve. This is going to help us design workflow. Inside that workflow, it's going to help us manage the time. This is also going to help us understand what to delegate and what we have to self-perform, and who we're going to select to delegate those projects to. It's going to help us understand the effectiveness of people we've assigned to complete those tasks. It's going to have an influence on the way that we coach and mentor people. This may even have an impact on our competitive analysis, the way we see ourselves versus the way we see our competitors. This may also have an impact when we get involved in mergers and acquisitions and looking at other organizations that we may be wishing to acquire. And what are their internal capabilities and where are they on the corporate lifecycle workflow? This is going to touch everything a manager does, all from this central kernel of the time span of the goal.